And this title today is called The Neglected Art of Compromise. So let's give Stan a very, very warm welcome.
A cartoon in the New Yorker magazine has a pastor and a priest outside a room where inside different denominations are meeting. The devil steps inside on hooves with a trident and its tail swishing beneath its cloak. The pastor says, sometimes we take this unity movement a bit too far. Of course, no one wants to deal with the devil. But that's the definition of compromise in Washington. Why is it that the slightest bit of compromise is so bitterly resisted? I want us to consider that I compromise my life. My daughter, on her learner's permit, had a run-in with an 18-wheeler that we both survived. My sacrifice and advice to my youngest daughter, now on her learner's permit, just may save her life. That's what I tell myself every time I brace myself in the front seat. Fellow passengers, let's leave behind the road rage in stuffy Washington and instead go on some back roads to really rediscover the art of compromise. First at the wheel will be a lawyer and senator who nearly wrecked the whole country. Our second ride will be more peaceful with a philosopher, poet. In the Compromise of 1850, Daniel Webster wanted to free the slaves, but he wanted even more to appease the secessionists. He ended up pleasing no one. The North was enraged that it had to return the runaway slaves. The South was simmering with resentment that its property rights were violated. Compromise for the sake of unity always leaves on a back burner the main issues until they boil over. And then both sides are in a bitter battle. Let us consider that bitter battle was lost, of course, in the Civil War, but it was almost lost in Stephen Benet's The Devil and Daniel Webster. Webster's client had sold his soul to the devil. And when scratch comes a-knocking, that's when Webster demands a jury of his peers. Scratch summons men like Blackbeard with the hellfire still on him, and others like Judge Hawthorne of the Salem witch trials. Webster is about to wreck again until he recognizes that the judge and jury are feeding off his anger. His bitterness is what burns in their eyes. It's like a Chuck Schumer feeding off of Donald Trump or vice versa. Webster has discovered that the art of compromise is carefully cultivating the common ground. Like the freshness of a fine morning, the savoring of food when you're hungry, the freedoms no demon can fathom. That judge and jury relate. And they set that farmer free. Now, it's easy for us to simply dismiss slavery and dismiss enslavement by the devil as immoral. But is a wall immoral? Let's hear what one poet had to say. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Now, that probably is our first acquaintance with a wall, and it didn't go too well for an egg. But an egg was never intended for that wall. Nowhere in the 15th century nursery rhyme is an egg indicated. The 2017 Huffington Post says that Humpty Dumpty was simply the term for a big person. A big person that only Lewis Carroll in the 19th century visualized an egg. A certain Nancy in Wonderland may always see an egg on a wall, a poor egg about to fall. Others may see a big person scaling the wall. For a different perspective, let's go to a different poet, Robert Frost, in Mending Wall. He's mounting stones with a neighbor that have fallen because something there is that doesn't love a wall. Says the neighbor, good fences make good neighbors. But Frost thinks, my apple trees will never eat the cones underneath his pines. Still, he mends the wall. My brother-in-law was never kept out by a physical wall, just a legal one. He applied for immigration on the traditional quota system, and it took him 10 years to get a green card. By that time, he had to decline and choose instead to stay with his new wife and newborn son in England. Some walls may seem unfair, but the immoral walls are those our representatives in Washington have erected between them. Let us consider, fellow passengers and drivers, on our continual journey to not spew out hate, but to relate, to give and take so we can find common ground. And most of all, let us brace ourselves because the drivers of compromise are always on a learner's permit. Mr. President.